Hi. In today's video, we're going to talk about electrical. Specifically, we're going to talk about the early phases of electrical where you're going to run the wires in your van. And we want to talk about where you're going to run those wires. And this video is for one of my subscribers. So she's working on her van. It's a Ram ProMaster. She's getting ready to do the electrical components, and I thought this would be a good time to put this video together for her and everyone else. By the way, her name is, her YouTube channel is Solo Elisa Explore RX, and she's doing a video of all of her build and putting them on her YouTube channel. She does great videos. I highly recommend that you go take a look at her channel, subscribe to her channel, and watch her videos. While you're at it, please subscribe to my channel, like this video or the others, and I'm hoping this helps you with your build. So as I mentioned, today we're going to talk about electrical and running the wires. But to get there, I want to start by talking about the walls and the components that you're going to install in your van first. I mean, we're going to talk about it first. You install them later. You can imagine inside your van, you've got just the metal walls, and you've got these vertical pillars, you've got horizontal beams, you've got sort of joists across the ceiling. And those are all of your structural components where you're going to attach your upper cabinets, your bed, your galley, your boxes, cabinets, chairs, tables, all of the heavy stuff that is going to get attached to your van is going to be attached to those structural components, those pillars and beams. And so you can imagine when you go to install those things, you're going to put screws or bolts into those, and you can't have wires inside those channels or because those screws and bolts could puncture the wires and create a short circuit. So we don't want to run the wires inside all of those channels. Instead, you want to run your wires through the voids, those big open areas where you're going to have insulation. So that those are sort of safe zones. You're not going to be putting screws into those zones. You also want to create a bit of a map of where the wires are going to be, because that wiring map is your no screw zone, right? If there's a wire that comes down the middle of a void and through a beam, you're not going to want to screw in that location of the beam. So the fewer places you have where you're crossing through those beams is it's going to be safer and easier to know that you're not accidentally creating a short circuit somewhere down the road. So what I like to do is in that metal shell of the van, imagine where your electrical cabinet is going to be. That's your primary fuse box. And you're going to run kind of the main bulk of wires coming out of that location to various locations throughout the van. I like to have sort of that main bundle of wires come straight up through one of those voids, up into the upper section. Some of it will go across the top next to one of the rafters, joists, and then down the other side, and down into the lower part of the other side. So imagine sort of one main vein of electricity that goes through there to the other side of the vehicle. Now you've got electricity on both sides. You're going to have that vein that comes down near the lower section and branches off to outlets and electrical components that you have in the front or in the back. Similarly, up near the top, I like to run that electrical wire right up in the top corner. And I do all of this inside the walls, not to be exposed on the outside. So because there's no screws that I put in right at that very top corner. So think about where your walls are going to go and how you're going to attach those walls. Think about where your cabinets, your L-track, your galley, everything, how's that going to be attached to your structural components, and make sure that the wires don't go there. And then limit, just like you would imagine the veins in your body, you've got sort of these main branches of wires that are going to go out to a certain location, and then they can sort of branch off to the different points. So that's step one. Figure out kind of the wiring diagram for where those wires are going to go, and don't put them into the channels where you're going to screw. Second, what kind of wires are you going to run? In my first van, I would use like a triple strand of wire, a bundle with an external white sheath that contains maybe a black and a red for a DC circuit, or it might contain 3 wires for an AC circuit. The problem was when you use those bundled wires with the external white sheath around them, when you have a whole bunch of wires coming through, the amount of sheathing adds up pretty quick and you get these massive bundles. Instead, what I recommend now, what I use now, is individual wires without that external sheathing. It's just the main wire with its insulation on the wire. I use red and black for my DC circuits, and I use black, white, and green for my AC circuits, AC being alternating current. It's the standard 110 or 120 volt outlets that you would see in a household in the US. So you're going to have AC and DC circuits. You're going to have red, black wires, and you're going to have black, white, and green wires. And we're going to talk a little bit in a moment about Ohm's law, calculating the currents that you need, and the size of the wire. As you go through and you figure out a given circuit, how much electricity, how much power, wattage, that circuit needs to be able to maintain based on the things that you're going to put on the circuit, like a water pump or a refrigerator, whatever it might be. You can figure out how much current needs to run through the wires to get to that circuit. As you do that, you're going to come up with a bunch of different sizes of wires. I'm going to recommend that you sort of size up to a couple of consistent sizes. It just makes it overall much easier if you're only dealing with a couple of sizes of wire, but those sizes need to be big enough to handle all of the things that go on that circuit. In my vans, all of my wiring throughout the van comes down to a 12 gauge wire or a 20 gauge wire. I use 12 gauge wire for all of the AC circuits. That's going to support up to a 20 amp AC circuit, a 120 volt, 20 amp circuit, and below, right? So it's not going to do 30 amps, but I don't have any individual circuits that are 30 amps. And if I did, I would use a 10 gauge wire specifically for those, but I typically don't have a 30 amp circuit. On my DC circuits, I also use that same 12 gauge wire for most of my circuits. It's bigger than I need. It allows for more current than I need on most of them, but it simplifies the process quite a bit to only have to buy a bunch of 12 gauge wire and use that everywhere I go. And because I'm not using that sort of pre-sheathed material with all that extra sheathing, I've got plenty of room to run those wires. I use 18 gauge wire in a few specific locations where I don't need as much current. For example, switches that are just sort of a logic switch to turn on or off a component, or like a LED lights, a few small LED lights or puck lights, or like the gooseneck lights that go over the back of the bed. Those are very low current circuits, and so I'll use a 20 gauge wire for those. Again, it might be overkill, but it simplifies my build, and it's cost effective to just buy those two sizes of wires, 12 gauge and 20 gauge. What kind of wire do you want to use? You want to use you don't want to use a solid core wire. So if you imagine, like in a household, you've got something called Romex, which is a solid core copper wire. You're not going to use that in a van because that solid core can become brittle over time with the vibrations and movement of the van. Those could crack and create arc points or heat points or loss of electricity and energy. You're going to use a stranded wire. Marine grade, high strand count, stranded wire of the proper gauge, and you're going to want to use an insulation sheath on that is 105 degrees Celsius, which is the higher temperature rating associated with it. So that's a high quality wire. I use Ancor, A-N-C-O-R. It's one of the top quality wires. I just get it on Amazon, and you can go, I've got a link down below to a lot of these components, so you can just jump down there and look at some of the components that I use in my builds to simplify that process. Ancor, marine grade, high strand count, copper wire, 12 and 20 gauge of the various colors I just mentioned. How much wire do you need? You're going to want to measure that out inside your van. I like to take just a piece of cord, like a paracord or something, and I'll run it through where it needs to go in the van. And then you're going to want to add a couple feet on the end where your appliance is going to go for your plugs, and so that you've got what's called a service loop. A service loop is a little extra loop. It's typically like a 6-inch loop once or twice tucked into the outlet. That way, if you ever need to do any work in there, you can pull that extra material out, do some work, and tuck it back in. You always want to have a little bit of a service loop at your endpoints. Where it comes back to your main battery system, your electrical box, where all the components are going to live, your electrical components like your battery and your inverter and all that stuff. Figure out exactly where you're going to want those things, and again, give yourself a couple extra feet right there, so that when the time comes later for you to put all that electric stuff together, you've got plenty of extra. If you cut off an extra foot or two on the wires, it's way easier than trying to splice an extra foot or two on. So give yourself a couple extra feet. There's going to be a little bit of waste, but that's fine. And again, make sure you've got a service loop there, so that if you ever need to pull some of those components out, you've got a little bit of extra to work on. All right, so running the wire. As I mentioned, I like to run the wire inside my walls, inside the ceiling, so it's all tucked and out of the way. And you're going to run it inside those voids. Those voids, that means you're going to have to cross through beams, and you have to cross through some of the pillars. So you're going to drill a few holes inside those beams and pillars. I use a 1.5-inch hole saw drill bit that can go through wood and metal. It's just metal in this case, but a metal bit that's going to go through. And so in a vertical beam, you'll drill, it's typically 2 sides of that you're going to go through, and then you're going to want to protect the edges of those holes. Obviously, with any holes that you cut in your van, you're going to want to sand them down. You're going to want to paint them so they don't rust, and then you're going to want to protect the edges of the wires that go through there. I use plastic grommets, 1.5-inch plastic grommets that pop into those holes after I've drilled and cleaned them up. And then I run all the wires through, and then after the wires have been run, so I run all the wires loosely first throughout the whole system with the extra hanging off the ends. Through the ceiling, I'll have a few zip ties just to kind of loosely hold it in place while I run the wires through. And after all the wires have been run, you're going to go through with those wire protective sheathing. You can either use the plastic protective sheathing, or there's sort of a woven sheath that you can wrap around the wires, and anywhere it passes through those pillars and beams, anywhere that the wire comes in contact, it runs up against the edge of the van, anywhere that the wire could possibly kind of rub against a piece of metal, another piece of metal in the van, rub against anything really, you want to put those protective plastic sheathing there. It might only be a 10-inch section as it goes through a pillar, but protect that. Run a little bit of tape at both ends to hold it so it doesn't come out of the way, and now your wire is protected against friction and rubbing. If you don't protect it, then the wire can rub against another piece of metal in the van, an edge, and it'll cut through that metal sheath, and you've got a short circuit, which is ultimately what we're trying to avoid, is any short circuits. If you were to get a short circuit down the road against a piece of metal buried inside your wall, you would have to disassemble your van down to the guts to try and find and fix that. So we want to take a lot of care at this phase to make sure that the wire is nice and tight and bundled and protected against all of those areas where it could rub and get a short circuit. At the end of this process, you've got these nice tight little bundles. You can take a little extra electrical tape or zip ties and kind of tie them up so that they're tight bundles that run through, protected everywhere it touches the van, down to your home run where your battery system is going to be, and out to these service loops at all of the locations where your electrical components are going to be. Let's talk for a minute about those locations for all of your electrical components. You're going to need things like LED lights in the ceiling. LED lights perhaps underneath your countertops. You might want LED lights at the base of your counters, like baseboard lighting. You are going to want USB chargers in a variety of locations, on the galley, up near the bed. You're going to want some bedding lights, like reading lights up inside the bedding area. So go through, I like to make a long list of all of the electrical things I'm going to have, a fan, an air conditioner, everything you might possibly need. Make a list of it and make sure you've got a wire that goes to that location of the appropriate size. Typically for me, it's either going to be a 12 or a 20 gauge. There are a few exceptions to that. So for example, if there's going to be an air conditioner, if it's a DC air conditioner on a 12-volt circuit, I might need a 2-gauge wire, or even a 1-aught wire that goes up to that air conditioner. You're also going to want to run extra wire for things that you might need down the road. So this is where you want to plan ahead for additional optionality. Maybe you're going to put a fan in right now, a DC fan, so you've got a red and a black 12-volt for your DC fan, but you might want an air conditioner down the road. I would run an additional AC, three strands, black, white, and green. I would run a triplet of those up there and back down to my home run, even if they're not currently used, because that allows me down the road to put in an AC, an alternating current air conditioner, if I decide I want it. I don't have to rewire the system to do that. If I know I'm going to have a DC circuit, I might run a big pair of DC wires up there for that air conditioner, if that's the way I want to do it. But run some extra wires. By that same token, you're going to have a few holes in the outside of your van. It goes up to the roof. We call those cable ingress, cable entry glands. So you'll have a few cable entry glands up on the roof. That's where your solar wires are going to come down inside the van. You're going to want to run all of these wires now at the wiring phase. I also, on that ceiling, on the roof, I like to have an extra cable entry gland, and I'll run 3 pairs of DC 12-volt wires in case I want lights later on. So I might want some roof lights in the front, in the back, maybe over the door. I may not put them in right now, but I want to run the wires for it now. I might want a cell phone range booster, or maybe a Starlink satellite system or something. So I like to run a coax cable through that cable ingress gland. Now those additional wires up onto the roof, they just get coiled up, and I'll put a boot over the top and seal it up. So there's additional wires at the top with a service loop that's just tied off. They're there in the future if I want them. And then they're inside the walls or the ceiling down below, and they come down into either my main battery compartment where my wiring is going to go, or they might go underneath the driver's seat if I'm going to tie into the vehicle's battery system, like for driving lights, like a front roof light. And they're just coiled up in there. That allows me the option down the road, or my client down the road, if they want to add those lights, they don't have to rewire the system. They're already in place, ready to go. Wiring is relatively cheap, and this is the time to run those wires. So make your list, all the things you could possibly want wiring for, run the wires for it now, and get them all nice and tight and tidy and cleaned up, and it's out of the way. Then you can move on to the next phase of your project. For me, that is the walls. I'll have a whole separate video on windows, walls, wall panels, the L-track that I use to create that internal securing system. Those all come next after the wiring. In fact, the installation happens right before I install the walls. But if you watch my wall video, which I don't have yet, it'll come soon, then you can see how those pieces come together. I almost forgot. There's a couple of equations, math equations, for the electricity in a van that are going to be really important to you. One in particular. This is the most important equation that you can know, and you're going to learn it, and you're going to use it quite a bit. It's simple. Power is equal to voltage times current. So the power in watts is equal to the voltage in volts times the current in amperes. So let's take a small example. Let's say I'm building my van as a 12 volt system. My voltage is 12 volts, and I have an electrical wire, and I'm going to run 10 amps through that wire. So I have 12 volts times 10 amps. What's my power? It's 120 watts. It's 12 times 10 is 120 watts. So that's a simple equation. It allows me to calculate how much power I can get through a circuit that's a 12 volt circuit based on a certain number of amps. A common way that you're going to use that equation is to calculate how many amps you need to support on a circuit, knowing the power. So for example, let's say I have a circuit that runs to my galley. And at the galley, I have a refrigerator, and I'm going to want to plug in a couple of USB chargers. So I add up how much power that could take, and I want the maximum power. I want the maximum power that the fridge can take in watts, and I want the maximum amount of energy that those two USB chargers could take in watts, and I add all that together. Let's say it's 50 watts for my fridge and 25 watts for each of the two USB chargers. So I'm looking at 50 plus 25 is 100 watts that I need to support those devices on a DC circuit. It's going to be 12 volts, so I take 100 divided by that 12 volts is equal to, do the math, this many amps. So my wire needs to support that many amps. Typically now, when you go size your wire, you're going to size it a little bit bigger than what's necessary there so that we don't melt the wire when we run that much current through it. Now that's the maximum current. We want to size the wire a little bit bigger than that, and we're going to size a fuse that we put on that wire to support the amount of power. So for example, the fuse is usually a little bit smaller than what the wire can support. So that if I run too much current through that accidentally, if there's a short circuit somewhere and it pulls more than the 100 watts that was allowed for, I don't want it to melt that wire and cause a fire. That's what the fuse is for. The fuse will melt, or if it's a breaker, it'll trip the circuit on the breaker. If you try to pull too much power through a breaker or a fuse, it will blow the circuit or burn through that fuse. It protects the wire. Fuses protect the wire. So we're going to size the wire for the known current, and we're going to have a fuse that protects against short circuits. That's how the electrical system gets put together. There are a couple of useful resources that I want to provide for you when you are calculating the power and the size of your wire, your circuits. It's very helpful to have a couple of calculators. I like to use Blue Sea systems. Blue, the color, B-L-U-E, Blue Sea, S-E-A. So if you go to the Blue Sea website, or if you just Google Blue Sea wire size calculator, there's a couple of things. First of all, there's an app, a Blue Sea wizard that you can put on your phone. I use that frequently to do some quick calculations to see what size of wire I might need. It automatically gives you the extra little bit of buffer that you need above Ohm's law so that the wire is properly sized. It also provides the size of the fuse that you might need on that circuit. So the Blue Sea Systems has that little wizard app that can go on your phone. They also have a chart, and I'm going to put links to these in the comments down in the description down below. But you'll want to go to that Blue Sea chart and bookmark that link. So when you look at the Blue Sea Systems chart, you'll see the current flow in amps across the top, and down the left side you'll see a couple of different types of circuit and lengths of wire. So what happens as you run electricity through a wire, it's kind of like running water through a hose. The longer the hose, the more pressure it takes to push the water through the hose. There's resistance as the water flows through the hose. And it takes, the longer that hose is, the more pressure it takes at the start to get the water to come out the other end. The same is true for wire. It requires a higher voltage at the start to push the electricity through that wire. Or said a little bit of a different way, for a given voltage that you start with, that voltage is going to decrease the longer the wire is. So if you've got a long wire run in your van, the voltage at the other end is going to be lower. We combat that, we fight against that by having a bigger wire. A small wire is going to have a larger voltage drop than a thicker wire. So if you need a certain voltage, if you start with a 12 volt battery, which is about 13.2 volts that's going to come out of your battery, and you need pretty close to 13.2 volts at the other end of a long run, you're going to have to use a large wire so that you don't have a voltage drop. So when you look at sizing wire in your van, you're actually looking at two things. One of them is the amperage, so that you can run the proper amount of amps through that wire without heating it up and melting the wire, causing a fire. You're also going to look at the voltage drop, and that's why that blue C chart is going to show you whether or not you're looking at a 10% voltage drop, which is a non-critical load, or a critical voltage drop, which is a 3% drop, a low drop. Some of the appliances or components that you put into your van work just fine in a large voltage range. If there's a voltage drop, a large voltage drop, they still work just fine, like an LED light. A little bit less voltage is just a little bit less bright on your LED light. So that's a non-critical component. And you can use that 10% non-critical voltage drop part of the calculator. If you've got a more critical component that needs exactly that much voltage, like a charger of some sort, the charger has to have a certain amount of voltage that arrives to it, then you might need a heavier, thicker wire to go there so that you don't have that voltage drop. The Blue C chart or the calculators that they have online are going to incorporate that voltage drop in the current in the recommendation of the size of the wire. So I have that bookmarked on my phone, that Blue C chart. I use it all the time. I also use that Blue C app on my phone, both cases to kind of figure out the size of the wire. Now, most of the time, as you can tell from this video, I size my wires. I only use like a 12 gauge or a 20 gauge wire, but I still want to make sure that when I'm building a circuit, I'm not putting too much stuff to go over the 12 gauge wire capacity associated with it. So on each one of your circuits, do the math based on Ohm's law, power equals the voltage times the current, and use those Blue C charts and calculators to make sure that your power consumption and your voltage and your current are all going to be within what you need for that circuit. Please subscribe to my channel if you want to see the wall video, the other videos. I've got a new van coming in a couple weeks, and I'm going to go through start to finish everything to build out the van the way I build it out. And if you're building a van, you'll want to see all those parts. So please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and head on over to Solo Elisa. Watch her videos, subscribe to her channel. Comment down below if you're building a van, if there's specific things that you want to see or questions that you have, and maybe we can customize a video just for that. Thanks. We'll see you on the road.